All right, welcome back everyone to the AU Core Technical Design Group meeting. This is our last one before we basically content freeze on what is going out to ballot for R1 of AU Core. And so we've got a couple of those change requests to come through today. I'll just pop up the agenda. So the plan for today's meeting is going through our usual business and our updates like we always do, and then finishing off the discussion that we were having in our last meeting on last updated. And I'll give a little bit of a summary from that. And Heather Leslie, one of the AUCDI authors, has also joined us today to support that conversation, which is fantastic and really appreciate it. And then we've got the change requests that we had a couple of brave volunteers say that they would like to take those through in this meeting. So we'll have Steph and also Eileen, and we'll go through and look to have those in today's session. And then, look, depending on the amount of time we have left, we'll start going through some of the ballot snapshot preparation and the progress and dive into a little bit more detail on that for people if you're interested before talking about what our next meeting is. And that's basically the plan for today. Before I move on, noting again, this is our last meeting before the ballot snapshot. So one of the things we need to do is make sure that we have considered any critical or urgent changes. I just opening the floor here. If there is anything someone's discovered in the last recent bits that would prevent us going to ballot from AU Core, like a serious error, a technical design issue or anything like that coming through. I will just leave that open too as we go through the meeting. So I'm not aware of any. So for all the testing has identified a number of things that we can choose to go through as candidates, but no errors that are preventing us from moving into the ballot space at this time. All right, so let's move into it. So our first piece of business, as it always is approval of minutes. So our last meeting's minutes from the fortnight ago. This was sent round, I think, on Monday. So these are here and ready to be approved. I'll just do a quick scan through for people. I'm not aware of any outstanding feedback on this. So a quick more scan. But if anyone would like to signify that they need more time or they think that a change needs to be made, please raise that now. All right. So I'm not hearing anything. So I will be happy now if someone would like to motion to approve the minutes.
Sorry, Michael
I'll
Osborne.
motion. I'll second.
Michael
that
Osborne beat you
motion.
there. Okay, do she? No problem. So we have a motioner and a seconder. And now I will put in our meeting poll. And so I'm going to launch that. For those of you whom this is your first meeting, you should now be seeing an approval of minutes of previous meeting popping up here. We ask people to undertake the vote. If you are happy to approve the minutes, put affirmative. If you didn't attend the meeting, then you're welcome to hit abstain, basically. And we're now going through that approval, and I'm going to close off that in 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'll end that poll and I'll share the results. So that motion is passed. We have 23 in the affirmative at 70%, and 10 are abstaining at 30% abstaining. So we'll move on to our next piece of business. So let me bring this back up. Okay, so actions. We had one action from our last meeting, and so that was in context for people. We were discussing last updated and the AUCDI data element, and we needed to time box that to move through the meeting. So that's come back to this one. And Heath raised a request to get some clarification on the intention for last updated and if that was intended to be a clinical assertion. Now, what I'd like to do is, because that's the next real item for us to do, is to have that update come and that confirmation, I guess, from Heather to talk to that when we begin the last updated discussion. So we'll start going through that in, I think, maybe another 5 minutes. Okay, updates and news. So ballot sign up reminder, folks. Next week is the last week. It's a hard closure on the 5th of August. And there'll be a couple more details in the next slide. I also wanted to raise here, okay, update. We have an errata publication of AU Core. So we had AU Core 040, what was out and being tested. During the testing, they identified a dependency issue with Smart App Launch that was preventing resolution of AU Core dependencies we've got a fire tracker there for 46398. Now that's actually been resolved. So we've fixed the version of Smart App Launch we refer to and released a errata publication at 041 preview. So that's out and available. And also the matching Inferno suite is also out and available at this time. And announcements on this also went out on Zulip. So that's it for that set of updates and news. So let's go into a little bit more on our ballot. So I was talking about the ballot sign up. You'll also probably start to see, I think Jamie's going to be adding some links in the chat here. So in terms of ballot voter sign up, there's 1 more week. And you need to be a member of HL7 and also have a Confluence account. And then complete the sign up form, and that stays open until the 5th of August. And then we go in the following sort of weeks, and there's a week's grace, and then the ballot period is open for 4 weeks. I'll also remind everyone here that even if you are not going to be voting, that does not mean that you can't participate in this or that you can't provide valuable feedback into AU Core at any point in time. Feedback can be submitted on AU Core using the links at the bottom of each page, which come and look like propose a change, and that will then be added in order to the JIRA backlog, which is actually what is voted on during the ballot period. And I'm just going to give a little update on where our numbers are sitting at the moment. So we currently have 40 voters registered for AU Core at the moment. Those come from 11 individual members, and the rest of the voting pool are from 15 different organisations at this time. And in our next meeting, I guess I'll be able to give you the final count of that, because by that point, ballot sign up will be closed. So next little bit of update is on the Connectathon. And in fact, it's the work group meeting day and the Connectathon. So this is in Brisbane. The 20th of August is the work group meeting day, and that includes all work groups. We're counted as one. So that's the fire work group, AU Core Technical Design Group, and the e-requesting Technical Design Group. These are being run as hybrid meetings. I think I've got the agenda at the end of this slide pack to talk about what's happening in our next few meetings. And the tickets are available through Eventbrite. And let's just do a bit of updates on here on what's available. So far in terms of attendance, there are 58 people who've registered to attend in person on the work group day. There are 32 spots remaining. So we can, from a health and safety perspective, we are allowed to have 32 additional people at that day. But I'm just going to draw your attention here to the Connectathon, folks. There's only 4 spots left in terms of registration for that 2-day Connectathon, which is covering, of course, both Sparked and e-requesting. So if you were planning to attend, I would suggest that you use the links in the chat now and get into that so that you have the tickets there. If you miss out on a place, so if you go to register and you find that there are no more tickets available, what you want to do is email events@hl7.com.au with what you want to go onto the wait list for. And then if a space opens up, HL7 will contact you and let you know that you now have a ticket. Any questions about the Connectathon so far? I know it's still reasonably far away. All right, let's move on.
Sorry, I was just going to ask.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find my hand putting up.
No problem.
So I apologise. I was just going to say for the Connectathon that's on the 21st and 22nd, isn't that more technical doing?
It is. So it's less technical than the testing events we've been holding for AU Core. So observers
Okay.
are welcome to attend and to join in some of the discussions. It is still an event in which we're aiming to connect and test out parts of the specification. On some of those days, there will be things that we call, I guess, breakouts, where there'll be some discussions, I think, especially from the e-requesting folks. We're not planning any for core, but e-requesting is, I think, intending to have some sessions which are exploring concepts around identifiers. And I think there's a number of others. Michael Wilson, could you just give a quick list on what some of the potential candidate e-requesting breakouts are?
Yes, definitely. Just camera does work. Yep. So yeah, there's a few things where I think terminology might be one. So the code systems we'll use for e-requesting, I think missing and suppressed data, something that's come up, and identifies contained resources. So some of the things that we've kind of been working for, know that we need to work through in e-requesting. We thought some of the more technical ones that are related to the Connectathon, we might have some breakout sessions for those.
Thanks, Michael. All right. All right. Quick update on testing, and this will be a quick update. So AU Core testing is absolutely going on now, and I think we're scheduling trying to close that off in September. An update on here is there are now 30 different, I guess, unique product submissions to be testing AU Core that have come in, which is added into testing things around AU Core responders and requesters. And we've had a couple of the test events already, which have been really, really good at exercising parts of AU Core and identifying some of the things that aren't working for particular vendors or for particular products and use cases, as well as affirming a lot of what is already in AU Core. And I think what we've got we say that AU Core has been tested by 12 products today. So it's actually more than that, but the number 12 is coming from the fact that we have test results that have been submitted through the AU Core testing process in forms for 12 unique products. And so that test coverage matrix and report is in progress behind the scenes. And we're looking to start to surface that, I think, maybe around the time of that Connectathon, that work group meeting day, to start going through that information and working out where we maybe don't have quite as much confidence in the maturity of some of the parts of AU Core, and where we're also looking to therefore target some of that testing and work through on that. So last bit about that, there is one more AU Core testing event, and that is in Melbourne on the 1st of August. I was informed a couple of days ago, and I hope it's still true, that there are still 2 spots left. So if you were thinking of being involved in AU Core and coming to the AU Core testing event, Melbourne is that last opportunity on the 1st of August. There's a QR code to the form there, but I think Jamie will drop it in the chat. So you want to get registered for that as soon as you can, because there's only like 2 more spaces. All right. So that's the updates. let's go into our last tranche of AUCDI R1 reconciliation. So a bit of context for this, we've been working through this in our last few meetings. So the original, I guess, set of mappings we worked through as a group and then put out our AU core ballot for comment was related to the AUCDI for comment at the time. And AUCDI has continued to progress through its evolution and maturity and has published a release 1. And that introduced some new data elements. And so we've been working through those in our last few meetings to look at how that relates to AU Core, what and how does it map into R1, and where might that sit on a roadmap, as in which items do we think need to be put into a backlog of AU Core to work through in R2. And so this was the initial set of differences that came from AUCDI R1, where the grayed out data groups are the ones for which there was no change that we had to consider. And the ones in orange are where there was a new data element. And those were date times around date time of measurement or date time of observation or last updated. Now, we've had a couple of previous very successful meetings working through these. So here's where we are now. We've already gone through and looked at the medication use statement, which has been agreed to go onto our backlog. We've, in just the last meeting, agreed on the mappings for biomarkers and for last updated. No, sorry, hang on, not last updated. It was date time of measurement, and that is supported in AU Core R1. And in the meeting before that, we've worked through measurements and vital signs. And that is a mix of date time of measurement or date time of observation. And that is also supported in AU Core R1. I think someone's joined who might need to go on mute. It's getting a bit Darth Vader. Awesome, thank you. And so that leaves us with the conversation on last updated, that we really want to finish that conversation before we go out to ballot so that we can present that position as part of the balloted set or part of the content to be balloted for AU Core. So let's get a bit more into that. So this is last updated now across problem diagnosis, adverse reaction risk summary, sex and gender summary, and tobacco smoking summary. Same thing, just in a different format. Okay, so Heather, I might actually hand over to you here to provide some of the context and the intended meaning and use behind the element last updated to lead us into this conversation.
Sure. And I think I'm not sure that I've got a lot more to say than I did at the last meeting, but Keith clearly had still some questions. You'll notice that if you go back to the previous slide,
Sorry, getting that. This one?
Yeah, oh, that's fine. The 4 orange ones that remain, problem diagnosis is actually also a summary, but they are all summary, named as summary data groups. And the reason why that happens is because these are intended to be recorded once in a health record and then potentially updated over time with new revisions, basically. Any changes to the problem diagnosis where you might get a course change where things get worse or things get better. I mean, in the larger model, there are other data elements that might evolve over time. Adverse reaction risk summary, if you get a new reaction that you need to record, it will be another reaction event that would be added to this with new manifestations. The sex and gender summary may well also be updated over time as the situation changes. Tobacco smoking summary is currently just this overall status, but over time, as you go through episodes of not smoking during pregnancy, etc., you may have different statuses. So the notion from the clinicians, and particularly the archetypes where this originated from, while it's acknowledged that every time something gets updated, and a record is changed, it would be recorded in the system. There is also this sense of this last updated or currency is important from a clinical point of view. So basically saying this whole data group has been updated at this particular time. And that may show that something has been updated recently, which gives you information. It may also say that this was updated a long, long time ago and everything's been stable. That also gives clinical information that's valuable. It does not cover where somebody is or a clinician has actually looked at the record and said there's nothing that needs to be changed, but I confirm that this is correct. It's not going to that level of detail. So there are other dates that I'm aware of, but the notion here for last updated is at least to capture when it was current at the last time. So it is an assertion by a clinician at that time that this whole data group was correct. And when you're working within a single clinical system, a single electronic health record, that may well be that that date is exactly the same as the date it was recorded. But when we start to exchange data, or when we start to have, say, a care plan that might have a number of these summaries in it that come from different sources, different clinicians, different clinics, because you've got different participants, you may not have that same, the data when it was put into the document, or the same, that data that was put into that particular shared record may be different to when it was actually last updated. So there is sometimes when it's clinically significant to have some representation of that. Now, whether last updated is appropriate within the exchange scenario is, I guess, a question. I think Heath was talking about the clinical assertion date. This is, I guess, up for discussion, but that's where it's coming from. Most of the time, it will be exactly the same as it was recorded in the system and the latest version was created, but there are some subtle times when it might not be the same thing. And that's why we've effectively, what might seem a duplication is actually clinically significant. Is there any questions around that?
I've got a question. Why not call it date clinically asserted?
Because clinically asserted is feeling very technical, and the clinicians were familiar with this kind of thing. It is technically meaning that, and we could
okay, good. Yeah,
something like that, which might add clarity. So I'm not saying that this is perfect by any means. These are the words that have come through a lot of clinical review in the open air space, but I certainly take your point. I think that actually would be clearer.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's good to have, to have that clarity on the meaning as opposed to the clinician-friendly term.
Yep.
Diane?
Sorry, just to clarify, so if the record's been updated because there was an error, so it's not actually a clinical update, but it's been updated for some other reason, is that's not going to affect the state?
That's a good question.
Because otherwise I wonder if you call it last clinical update.
Well, within a clinical electronic health record, it's usually the clinician who is actually doing the correction and therefore updating an error. If you're talking about this as a technical error, that's a different question. I'm not sure how to respond to that.
But in a hospital clinical system, it could be a ward clerk that realizes, something was entered incorrectly. And so it's getting updated 3 weeks later, but the thing happened 3 weeks prior where it was clinically reviewed. That's just my question.
Yeah, and the ward clerk would have their name against it to know what the change was, and you would have a revision history, so you would see what that change was. Yes, that would be totally appropriate.
But it hasn't been clinically reviewed.
So in that date, would it be the date that the ward clerk changed the information that you want to see, or would it be the date that the clinician made the assessment that you want to see? Because because it feels like we want the clinician's date, not the ward clerk's data correction date.
But it is about when it was updated. So if it's clinical information that has been updated, that's ultimately what we want. It really doesn't matter who it was. It is the clinical data being asserted. This is, I mean, we can get ourselves tied up in knots. I'm really aware that if we start saying it's the clinical date, I mean, it is intended that way, but if we say only clinicians can do it, then we start to get into these problems. Does that mean we have to have dates for every type of person who might contribute and different types of updated? And I think we start to tie ourselves up in knots. And I'm not sure that we want to go there. I think we need to understand the intent of this. It is about when it was last updated. We assume that if a ward clerk did update it, it's done appropriately and for the right reasons, but we can't, we just cannot assert all these dates and actually have it working within a system and have audit trails and things. I think, you know, I hear what you're saying, but it's just not going to be practical. It'll never be done. We have to find a way to get the sense of this, what's it intended to do. It's about clinical currency, whether it's a formal clinician or it's someone on behalf of a clinician. And when we start to get into who is the author and who is attested, if we need to do that for every kind of update, that starts to get really complicated. So I'm reluctant to kind of go there. But
from the provenance perspective, it is important. You can't just brush aside and say that, look, we will tie ourselves in knots and then ignore it.
What circumstances would a ward clerk update clinical information not under the direction of a clinician anyway, though?
Stephen, I never said that you're not going to have who updated something. That absolutely goes into any revision of the record. This clinically updated is trying to reflect where it was clinically significant. If it's clinical data that has been changed, and as you say, if it's the ward clerk is saying this is the author of this that's gone into the record, and as is it Stephen just said, you know, the authorization and who can change that is another issue altogether. Whoever did it is then actually changing the last updated. Whether it's in a shared care setting or in some kind of shared document setting, the last updated and who actually, what date it was put into the system may differ. In most situations, it won't.
Thank you, Heather. So I think this leads us to the original proposal from our last meeting, which is not changed, folks, between the last meeting and this one, which is that this is something that is not a quick tick and flick that needs to be worked through and considered. And therefore, given that we need to work this through a development release of AU Core, that we need to put this into our backlog for AU Core and consider it for R2, and then take the time to work that through in a particular release around use case and going and testing out the particular options. That's what the proposal was coming from last week, but also allowing us to have a bit more teasing out, I guess, in preparation for that in these meetings. And so what I'd like to do at this point is also then open the floor to if anyone would like to make any further comments about this, either from potential solution aspects that we should be recording so that when we come back to this, we can consider it, or any other things that we think is important to just understand now as considerations for when we do work this through in AU Core. Brett?
So noting our previous discussions, there's no, for these items that we're talking about, there's no with allergy intolerance and condition and sex and gender, there's no real natural place for this kind of concept to live in the current fire elements. So yeah, I think, yeah, we're heading towards saying we need to think about provenance, and that I think is a bigger and larger discussion, considering we don't have a profile for provenance or have had any discussion before. So yeah, I might just leave it at that for now.
And Daniel?
Sorry, just unmuting. Yeah, look, I just have two, I guess, comments just with regard to future consideration. One is a very general comment, and I think we need to distinguish between the requirements of a source EHR system and the requirements of our minimum data set for interoperability. There's obviously quite considerable overlap there, and I'm not arguing that this shouldn't be part of our minimum requirements for interoperability, but one of the confusions that I have in talking with people who have an open air background is that they're thinking in terms of EHR a lot of the time, whereas in FHIR we generally think of interoperability, and there's a huge overlap in the space, both with using OpenAir for interoperability and using FHIR for your data modeling for an EHR, but they are distinct. And the medico-legal issues, although I'm not an expert in this, are different for your source system, and the ability to go back and track who said what at what time has to be available somewhere on a source system, but isn't necessarily something that needs to be shared in an interoperability space. And it might be, but it wouldn't always be. So then we need to consider, what do we put in our core, and what do we say, well, this will be important in some contexts, but not necessarily in all contexts. So that's my main comment. My secondary comment is working in oncology systems and software, workflow software for the last 5 years prior to coming here. A lot of times you don't get a single resource that gets updated. So when you're doing cancer staging and you're doing a condition, you don't typically have one condition that you update and create different versions of it. Each time you do a reassessment of the diagnosis, you assert it with a separate condition resource and retire the old one. So it's just a consideration, and it doesn't address all of the other issues around allergies and sex and gender issues and that kind of thing. But I just thought I'd raise that as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. We'll make sure we record that in the minutes so that we have those considerations captured. Would anyone else like to raise anything before a motion is entertained? All right, then I'm happy to entertain a motion if someone would like to motion, which I know I did in the previous meeting, but I'm chairing now, so I'm not allowed to motion.
I would like to motion what is on this slide, which is we consider this consider for future use, and we will come back to this discussion, so not to be included in this R1 release.
Thank you, Brett. Is someone happy to second that?
Marvin, I'll second it.
Thanks, Marvin. So if there are no further comments, I will trigger our poll in order to approve or vote for our current motion. So I've just launched that now, so people should see that on the screen. Please select one of those options. If you're happy for this to go into the backlog with our considerations being captured to surface that in R2 where we work through these issues, please select affirmative. If you don't think that that is the case, select negative. If you don't want to either vote for affirmative or negative, please select abstain. Okay, all of that's actually quite finished really quickly. So I'm going to end that poll there. And we have 29 in affirmative for 78%, 0 negative, and 8 votes for abstain. So that motion has passed. Thank you very much to everyone. That ends for AU Core R1, our AUCDI reconciliation. And thanks very much, Heather, for coming along to these meetings to help us talk through and understand what is intended and what the implications are for us in terms of these elements. So Our next port of call then, our change requests. So we flagged 2 change requests to come through. The first one, I believe, is our fire 46165. I'm now going to hand over to Eileen. I'm happy to drive. Just tell me what to do. I think you want me to start on this slide, or I'm also happy for you to share your screen.
Hi, Danielle. Hi, everyone. I think it's okay if you drive because I don't seem to see a screen share option on my end either.
You might be able to, if I stop sharing just briefly, you might have a screen share option.
No, I don't see, but I am on the browser, so that may be the issue.
All right, well, I'll start sharing again.
Okay, thank you. Okay, what I'd like to talk to you about today is some work that I've been doing with the condition resource, and I'm building a profile on that. This is a screenshot of what it looks like in draft stage at the moment. And the key things that I want to draw your attention to is that I'm deriving from the AU Core condition profile, and also that one of the elements that we have put an obligation on for handling is clinical status. And so that's why it's appearing in the differential. But also, we're not making any statement about verification status. And often the data that we will have, or that element will be empty because we don't have data in there. So what this profile is supporting is data coming from systems that may not have status information. So that's just a very high level overview of the profile and what we're doing with the status elements. So next slide, please. Where then this is why I'm raising this issue is that when I'm creating an example instance against this profile, and it doesn't have a clinical status or verification status, the validator shows a fail against a constraint, AU Core Cond 05. And at the bottom of this slide, I have the definition of that, which is that clinical status shall be present if verification status is not entered in error. But as I said before, the systems may not be populating all of this status information, and therefore we do have cases where both clinical status and verification status will be empty, and the constraint doesn't consider that scenario where there could be empty fields in there. So at the top of that slide as well, I just wanted to put in a screenshot about from AU Core and the guidance for working with missing data in coded elements, because that applies to clinical status in allergy intolerance condition and the immunization resource. Because we're not able to record unknown in clinical status, because that is not a value in the value set that has required binding to clinical status. And so we're unable to populate that with unknown. And also just on the slide there is another constraint, Con 5, which is in the Firebase specification resource, where clinical status shall not be present if verification status is entered in error. So these two constraints that are listed here, I guess, work in tandem. One has the positive assertion about having clinical status if verification status is not entered in error, and then the other one works in the other way, that clinical status shall not be present if verification status is entered in error. But both of these, again, don't consider the case where verification status is empty. And the next slide, please. So in R5 condition, this has been addressed in a couple of ways. One is to include the value of unknown in the clinical condition status codes value set, and also the constraint is removed. And so that brings me to 4 and what's in AU Core right now. And in the jury ticket, I did put a proposal to consider removing the invariant, but there's another option, which is also to edit the invariant to allow for an empty verification status. And then I have a link there to the jury issue, which has a proposal for if we're editing the invariant, what that could look like. So that's all the slides that I have, and I'm happy.
Thanks, Eileen.
For the discussion. Yeah.
So let's open that to the technical design group. Are there any comments or questions on the issue, the proposal, or anything else related to this? All right, if everyone's quiet, I have one. Which would you prefer? Would you prefer the proposal to remove the invariant entirely? Or is your preferred solution to change the nature of the invariant?
My original proposal was to remove it because I guess in this case, it wasn't working with the situation that I had, but also it seems that in R5 there's moves to remove the constraint altogether, and there's other ways of handling it. So that was my initial proposal, but I don't know the background for the inclusion of this invariant. So I'm also happy if that specific case of verification status not of entered in error, if that's important to call out, then that also will work for my use case.
All right. Does anyone have any further comments or questions on this? I can also go to the profile and show what this looks like if people would like.
Yes, please.
All right. And David, I see your hand is up.
I think that's just to go with remove the invariant, because that's what's happening in an R5, you know, and problems. Yeah, if we just keep on aligned with what's happening in R5, and then if that solves the problem, that solves our problem, then great.
So just looking at the profile now, what we can see, and I'll just make that a tiny bit bigger. So there's 2 elements. They're both optional, clinical status and verification status. There are 2 invariants applying some conditional rules on these, one of which is inherited by the base 5 standard, so we can't do anything about that. And the other one was introduced in AU Core, and this is something we can do something about, so we can remove it or change it. And what clinical status does, so let's maybe go to the snapshot so we can get the full description. So what these 2 elements do, clinical status is essentially the status of the condition. Is this active? Is it, you know, in relapse, inactive, and so forth. Set of values that are allowed are bound to fire, so we can't change them. So if clinical status is present, it must be one of those values. Brett.
I think seeing what's in R5, the only way we could probably represent unknown is to allow no value for clinical status. So I think the question really boils down to, should AU Core allow unknown clinical status? Because if we say yes, it should, then I think we should get rid of the invariant and just leave it at that.
I agree. I think that's is it acceptable in terms of minimal requirements to be sharing information about problems and not exchanging information about the status of that condition? If yes, then indeed we remove. If no, then we need to go into a bit further digging through on how to address Eileen's query. Marvin.
So if we do have it as unknown, what does that mean for interoperability? If we're sending a condition across and the status of the condition is unknown, I mean, I guess I assume it's okay, and it's just left to the recipient to do whatever they want with that, as opposed to us, you know, passing any meaning associated with it.
I think that's the question, isn't it? Because it's really like, is it okay to send things that have no status attached?
No information about whether it is current or not
current or
past,
or I think that's a little problematic in a lot of ways, because it's that you probably want to know if it's current or not current, you know, at least, right?
Yes, you want to know it. Sometimes you don't have it.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
So if we say that we don't have it, I guess if it's something that's been passed on from system to system, then I could understand that we don't have it. If it's something that's from your system and you're the originator of this, I suspect you probably would have it.
Mm-hmm. And Daniel?
I just think we need to bear in mind that the condition resource is used fairly broadly, and although we may want to specify what's important in the case of a diagnosis, it could also be something that records housing issues for an Indigenous community setting. It can be used for a very wide range of different alternative bits of information, and so that also impacts whether we should populate this field or not.
Thanks, Daniel. Brett?
Yeah, I could totally see that perspective, you know, in terms of other uses. I'm thinking of diagnoses mainly. It's also notable, I guess, we have obligations to populate if known. So that kind of does, you know, if you are a system that has a status and, you know, make diagnosis, you will expect you to populate that. So I'm probably getting what I would want to have anyway, if it's available. So, yeah, so in some ways, I think, yes, leaving it open might be a good move.
All right. Any other comments or questions before we look to entertain a motion?
Look, I like the idea of using populate if known here. Just the thing I want to bring up on that is that if another system asserts that their responders will follow AU Core Responder, will be AU Core Responder actors, they'll get that. But if another system says, no, I don't care if you're an AU Core Responder, then you don't get that. So people will have to, in a sense, consciously pick this up when they're building their dependent systems. But there's an obvious way for them to consciously pick that up.
All right. There's no further comments or questions. I think I'll entertain a motion. Eileen, did you want to make one?
Yes, so the proposal is to remove the AU Core Cont 5 invariant.
Okay, thanks, Eileen. Would anyone like to second that?
I'll second that, Richard.
Thanks, Richard. Are there any further comments or questions or anything someone wants to go through before we move to our voting poll?
Can I just confirm this is only for condition? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
All right, I'm about to bring up that voting poll now. And where is my button? Here we go. All right, you should start to see that now. If you would like to vote affirmative to remove that invariant, please vote affirmative. If you would like to say no, that invariant needs to be kept, vote negative. If you would like to abstain, then please select abstain. And I'm going to be closing this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I will end that now and I will share the results. So we have 25 in the affirmative for 66%. We have 0 voters negative and 13 have abstained at 34%. So that motion is passed and we will be removing the invariant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, on to our next change request for today. And I'll pass over here to Steph. Again, you're welcome to share your screen or just tell me what you would like me to do and click on.
You can drive. Thanks, Danielle. Okay, so this change request is to clarify the use of multiple and search on date to be with comparators. AU Core has search requirements on supporting multiple and on parameters where the underlying primitive data type is date or date time. The intent was searching by date range as opposed to searching for a resource that contains multiple dates. So the change request is to clarify that usage. The existing example shown is from the condition profile in the section about search parameters, but it will also affect other artifacts where date-related search parameters are specified, which include encounter, immunization, medication request, observation, patient, and procedure profiles. So the proposed change is noted there, that we'll change the third dot point shown in the existing example to what's shown in the proposed change, which reads, it should support multiple and on the parameter name, so that can be date for observation and encounter immunization, but it can also be search parameters like onset date for condition or authored on for medication request as examples. And if multiple and is supported, it shall support the search comparators greater than, less than, greater or equal to, and less than or equal to. Were there any questions on this particular change request?
Richard?
I have a question about implementers. Is it harder for implementers to do all 4 of those relations than to do just 2 of them? Because let me think. We want to be able to do ranges. Doing ranges requires a greater than or a greater than equal and a less than or a less than equal. What I'm wondering is whether we're making it a little more difficult than we need to. Or maybe we're not. And if you're going to implement this, greater than and greater than or equal to are just as easy to implement. So you may as well implement the 4 and just 2 of them. I like the simplicity of this one. I just don't know about what sort of difficulty it makes for implementers.
I think I will note, Richard, that there is an existing requirement that is a shall for the comparators regardless of this proposal.
Fine, I withdraw my comment.
No, that's fine. I just thought so. It does not. This proposal does not intend to reduce the level of conformance that already exists around comparators separately. Which, if you see in the existing example, currently, I think. Let me rephrase this in some ways. There are currently requirements in AU Core for date parameters that are on comparators. And then there's a separate set of requirements on multiple and. And I believe the intention on this requirement is to, you'll have to forgive me here, idiot proof slightly, to indicate that if you are doing multiple and, you have to be using comparators, because it isn't actually feasible to search for something just using multiple and without the comparators. Would that be a reasonable phrasing, Steph?
Yep, definitely. Yep. So bullet point number 2 remains as is. And then bullet point 3 is to add that, add that clarity on if you're supporting multiple and, then you shall support the date comparators, because the intention is to search by date range.
All right. Are there further comments or questions on this proposal? And again, would anyone like us to go to the spot in where this is visible in AU Core, or I guess the multiple spots, because this applies across the set of dates, search parameters that are dates? All right, I'm not hearing anything from people so far, so I'm happy to entertain a motion. I'll note, Steph, you're on mute if you're looking to motion.
Yep, I'll motion.
Okay, so you're going to motion the proposal change as worded. Would someone like to second that?
Marvin, I'll second it.
Okay, thanks, Marvin. Unless there are any further comments or questions, I'll open up the voting poll.
Sorry, just one question.
Mm-hmm.
Do we need to discuss anything about the other comparators that might be used but less likely, the SA and the EB?
I would expect those to be under a separate feedback ticket.
Sure.
And I think that would be really great if there are additional comparators that are thought to be things that we should be placing requirements around, or some guidance in AU Core. That would be really fantastic if people could raise those and indicate the use case and what they think needs to surface in AU Core.
No worries, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, I'll raise that poll now. I'll bring that back up. Okay, launch that poll. So you are voting for the proposal on the screen that the clarification that you shall be supporting date parameters if you are supporting multiple and is made clear in the AU Core requirements. All right, that's coming through. Most people have voted now. So I'll be closing this poll off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'll now share those results. So 28 have voted affirmative, giving 78%. 0 have voted negative, and 8 have voted abstain at 22%, and the motion is passed. Thank you, everyone. And that brings us to the end of the set of changes that we are going to be putting in to AU Core R1 to go out to ballot. So I guess well done, everyone, and really appreciate your time today and in bringing this through in terms of putting together something that is, I think, really shaping up to be a really clear set of those minimum requirements, and also to all the testing partners who are taking, who are participating, whether that's in an event or not in an event, who are going through and testing the parts of AU Core and identifying any QA issues, or coming through and doing that and letting us ensure that what is coming through and is being proposed has actually been tested. And so what I wanted to then start going through now is our AU core ballot preparation in our next meeting. And so that's what we're going to cover off for the next, I think, 25 minutes of this meeting, is go through some of this in a little bit more detail. I also encourage people at this point to be asking questions. If there are things you want to know about any of these, how does it work? What does it look like? Do you want me to demonstrate? Very happy to do that at this point, because what we've done is we've passed in this meeting all the critical things that we said that we needed to do in order to go to ballot. So this is essentially a free 25 minutes of walking through some stuff. So I wanted to talk on AU core ballot preparation, and what are some of the changes that are going into the AU core implementation guide, and also just put on screen some headshots of the people who are submitting, I guess, most of the PRs or are involved in the actual IG content. So you'll see Dishka and Jamie and myself tend to be people who are taking the decisions that we've just made and adding those into the AU core Fire IG, and also doing some internal testing and kind of reviews on those PRs to do that. And Brett Essler, who is the publishing facilitator really on the HL7 Australia side, who was also working through standing up the infrastructure and the tooling, and I guess really the build process in conjunction with some of the Spark staff on ensuring that the changes we made and the fact that we have a draft then goes up and is actually published. So all of those people, if you spot them or want to talk to them, that's what we look like. They're the main culprits, I guess. We're not the only ones, because this is open source. So several people on this call have also contributed in various parts to AU core directly through pull requests, and you absolutely can. In response to raising like GitHub issues or in the Jira space, if you want to raise something or work on a particular change request or proposal, you are most welcome to fork the AU core repository and go through and be submitting changes directly into AU core. So I'm going to go through now and talk a little bit more about what else is happening to the AU core IG besides the first bullet point, applying the agreed technical design group changes. And one of the things that I have a question on for the folks on the line is whether or not people are actually interested in some behind the scenes kind of maybe it's not quite webinars, but if we hold some virtual things where we pick a particular pull request and then we show people how do you actually add that into the IG, what are the different files you have to change, and how do you author a particular change? And I'm interested to know if that's the kind of thing that people are also interested in doing. And if it is, that's something that we can, I think, make easily happen, because I mean, we're certainly changing things all the time, and having a few of those instances be something where we're scheduling a time and doing that like virtually can be something that we can do. So if they are, just pop something in the chat now to go, yes, that sounds good. Right, so apply agreed TDG changes. I'm just going to give a bit of an update there. Let's actually go to AU core right now. So with the exception of the two things we just agreed today, all our other technical design group voted on changes are in the current build of AU core. So you should be able to see them. If there was something you cared about that got voted on, it's in here, or at least it is, or at least we intend it is. So if it's not in there the way you expect it to be, pop me a message on Zulip or raise something in the Jira, and we can look at that before it goes out to ballot. So other things that will be the changes from today are those two changes. And then we are, like I said, complete on the set of agreed changes from the AU Core Technical Design Group coming through. Some of that will surface, for example, in our guidance and mapping section. So the vote we had around how to treat last updated will surface in a few spots. That will be in the AU Core Data for Interoperability page here, where we maintain a current state of our mappings and decisions around how AUCDI elements relates. So I'm looking forward to removing these TBDs and replacing this with the decisions that we have made in today's session. One of the other things to note is, since last updated was a future consideration, there's a section in AU Core called Future of AU Core, which has a future candidate considerations. And we'll be looking to add last updated into this section with probably just a couple of points of the things we've talked about. We'll rely on, I think, the meeting minutes to capture the full set of considerations people have talked about. So I just wanted to show you some of that, which is going to be worked through. Coming back to the other things we do in terms of ballot preparation are reconciling our upstream impacts. And the upstream impacts for AU Core is, well, AU base. So we derive from AU base, and therefore any changes to the profiles or the terminology or the extensions that we refer to in AU Core that get undertaken in base can impact us. Over the, I guess, the development period of AU Core R1, quite a lot of that has happened. Some of it was intentional and driven by us. So some of the decisions we made around how to support sex at birth were things that we made the decision in the AU Core Technical Design Group and then took a set of motions and proposals to the firework group to have those changes be put in base. But not everything has been driven by us, unsurprisingly. That's, not what happens. So some of the things we will see that have changed, especially the changes that have come in since we last went out to ballot. So in base, we will see some changes around medications. If I go to the medication profile, what we will see now is that the slicing here, we were inheriting from AU base medication. AU base has made some changes that means it's removed slicing, which is a very, very good thing. And that means that those slices and how that works has moved into AU Core. So it's still the same set of must support and obligation requirements, but some of the definitional work now lives in Core. And it also means that if we look at base and we see a set of additional bindings here, these used to be slices. So we no longer inherit slices that we don't put must support on in AU Core. So that's some of the additional reconciling work that's been going on behind the scenes as AU base has made changes that mean that some of that has had to be addressed in Core. Now, I think base has thankfully finished making all their changes that would impact Core. So we are fully reconciled. So there's no further changes around that. And then we also go through and make editorial updates. Template changes is referring to the FIRE template. So that's a technical artifact that is part of the HL7 tooling that drives things like footers and colors and styling. And we often inherit and have recently, I think, published an update to that to take into account some of the changes from upstream. It has zero substantive changes to AU Core and probably has zero visible changes as well. It's more just the behind the scenes of some of the machinery of HL7 publication changes, we keep up to date with that. And then we get to what I think is really quite crucial is the QA checks and fixes. As we go through and we continue to refine and test out the decisions we've made. And the Australian Digital Health Agency did a fantastic QA review of AU Core and of AU Base, and fed into the Sparked IG authors a whole set of things where they'd identified where there were things like spelling mistakes or other kinds of problems to be able to feed that in and improve the baseline that'll be going to ballot. So thank you very much. I know some of the agency people are on the line. Really appreciate that. And then some of the other things we do are address warnings and errors from the QA report. So some of you might know, some of you might not, is for every implementation guide, there is an automatic validation. So I've just gone to AU Core as it currently sits. If you go to the footer, you will always see this little QA report. So there's automated validation that's part of the build process that does validate whether or not your implementation guide is meeting certain requirements, and it checks a whole bunch of things like, is the terminology accessible? Have you structured things correctly? Do your invariants work? Are your examples valid against content? And so this needs to be looked at very closely as we get up to ballot preparation, and the team of IG authors are going through every single one of these warnings and hints and determining what is the cause of that. Is that a problem in core? Or is that in fact a problem to do with some of the tooling? If you were party to the FMM discussion, you will have seen that sometimes there is some tooling errors. So for example, this one that is sitting there is actually an IG publisher tooling error. And that's been checked with Graham Grieve, who's confirmed that yes, that is nothing to do with the actual example in AU Core, but is actually related to the IG publisher, and he's going to be releasing a fix for that. What else do I want to say? Keep the technical corrections coming, guys. If there's something you notice in AU Core, sometimes that's through testing or otherwise, please raise a technical correction in JIRA. I did mention that earlier on the bottom of each page of the IG. So just coming down here, there's a little propose a change. If you spot something you think is a problem, please raise that. We pay attention to it and look through it. And then, of course, if it's a change request, like what we just went through today, where you want to clarify something or remove a requirement, then let's get that on the agenda and start talking through those. Back to this list. I think we've now gone through the examples, and then the rest of it is really about preparing for an actual ballot release. So working through versioning and ensuring the changelog is up to date and all our ballot notes and dependencies and all that sort of thing is in shape. I'll draw everyone's eye to this file I keep going to is the changelog. These are all the changes we have made since our ballot for comment up until when we release it on the 5th of August. So the difference between that, these are the significant ones. So we're not documenting every time someone found a comma or an extra white space, but the things like where we have moved to include obligations and actors in AU Core, which is a change we made through ballot for comment. All of that is logged in here, along with related to the fire JIRA tracker. The majority of these are ballot for comment, but also you'll see the vote that we took today will also, when it's made, be added on to this changelog page. So I just wanted to run through that for everybody. Before I move on, does anyone have any questions, or is there any other aspect of this that you'd like me to go into a little bit more detail about? All right then. So I'll move us on to our next meeting. Right, so after this one, final changes, we publish our ballot snapshot on the 5th of August, and our next meeting is the 8th. This is our standard virtual fortnightly. We're going to be going through in this one and talking about the ballot. How does that relate to the technical design group? What are we supposed to do when it comes to ballot responsibilities and activities and how we respond? And also do some planning for how we're going to reconcile the ballot issues that come out, and also do some planning for the AU Core Connectathon that's coming up in August. And that's the plan for the 8th of August. Our next meeting after that is our hybrid meeting. So that's the 20th, where we have the work group meeting day for AU Core. So again, I'll stress that's hybrid. So it will be a mix of a virtual through a Teams link, and we'll send out those invites shortly, and also the people in person in the room. Currently sort of on the agenda for that are starting to go through any of the governance items that we need to now address in AU Core as we're looking to close out Release 1. Doing some more planning and forward looking at how we close out Release 1 and when we want to start planning R2. And also a first look at those ballot issues. That's the intention for that session. And then, of course, the next day is AU Core Connectathon, which will also be testing our ballot snapshot. I'll draw people's attention just to the top right that if you are going to be participating in the ballot itself, that HL7 Australia is running a ballot participation information session. And I didn't put the Zoom link for that there. I really should have. Jamie, or if someone else can find that, if you could drop it in the chat. But I think invites might come out from HL7 to the technical design group as optional if you want to join in and see what's actually involved.
We'll definitely do that, Danielle. Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, we'll send it out to all the TDGs and work groups.
Fantastic. So last bit then is what do we mean by work group meeting day? Is this an all day? No, it's not. So for AU Core, we have a session. So I'm just putting up the whole agenda here. So it's a work group meeting day, but it doesn't mean that all the work groups are running in parallel all day. It's starting honestly at 9 o'clock in the morning, but this is optional. It's not necessarily official AU Core business, where there's going to be a welcome and introduction to how do work groups work, how does decision making work from 9 to 9:15. That's also going to be hybrid, so you can join in on that. And then the AU Core part of the day starts at 9:15 and goes for that hour and a half session. We are allowed to keep going. So if we're working through something and we want to actually carry that into the next session, I've been let know from the organisers that that is allowed. We have a separate room and a separate virtual dial-in. So we can indeed choose to continue into the next section if that's, as we're talking through something and we identify that, no, we need to make that decision today. And then for the rest of the day, e-requesting will start after morning tea. So that's at 11:15. Again, that'll be a separate dial-in. So if you're looking to come to both core and e-requesting, you would end the core meeting and then join the e-requesting meeting at 11:15. Probably a couple of minutes earlier, actually, to just make sure all the comms are working and everything. And that's going to carry through 2 sessions until 2:45. So it goes through lunch until 2:45, and there's an afternoon tea. And then the last session in the afternoon is the firework group meeting. I'll also caveat that e-requesting has the same option we do to keep going. So depending on what the e-requesting folks are doing, they may decide to continue into that afternoon slot, which would mean both the firework group meeting and e-requesting are occurring in parallel. And so for those of you who I'll see face-to-face, I'll be there, I'm chairing. This is at level 4, 275 George Street in Brisbane. It's got a little sort of room thing because we haven't been told which room we're in yet. We'll update that closer to the date. And there'll be like banners and everything telling you where to go. But that's where the location is. And I recommend you get here before 9 o'clock to get yourself some coffee, snacks, etc. Sign in. So any questions about the work group meeting day? Nope. All right. I think we've actually come to the end of the agenda for this one, to be honest, which is fantastic.
That's very good, Danielle. Could I just add, just with the balloting, I'm going to put my HL7 Australia board hat on. To be signed up, you need to be an HL7 Australia member to be able to vote. So that means come the 6th of August, the day after the sign-ups finish, you need to be a member to be included and loaded into the voting system. And you need to maintain your membership through the ballot period. So at the end of the ballot period, which is on the the 8th of September, you still need to be a member at the end of that period too. So I know there's a few members with memberships ending through that period, but you need to maintain your current membership through the period to have your vote included. So just to note that, if people want to get anything, any advice on that or anything like that, you info@hl7.com.au will get you to me and others. So hopefully, people can sign up if they need to and just check your membership, because we will be checking them this time. We have asserted that you need to be a member to vote, and this time we're really quite serious about it since it's the working standard. We'll be checking that on the way through. Thanks.
Thanks, Brett. All right. So unless there are any other items that people need to raise, we will close this meeting a little bit early.
That's never happened before. That's good.
Well, I think maybe once we were 2 minutes early.
Yeah, nice.
All right. Thanks for everyone today. Really appreciate it. I'll see you on the other side of a ballot snapshot coming out. Thanks again, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.